I'm very pleased to present you our first guest, a very dear colleague Zoran Sindberg Jensen from Denmark, from University of Southern Denmark, Faculty of Humanities, Department of Design, Media and Educational Science. And the title of his presentation is Engaging Children in Research Projects, Challenges and Potentials of Philosophy with Children. So Zoran, you have approximately 20 minutes of time and the floor is yours. You can share your presentation.
Thank you so much, Matea, for this introduction, and I will just jump right to sharing my presentation here. I hope you can all see what's just a second. And so now I believe the screen is right. Yes, as you just said, Matea, I'm speaking today under the title Engaging Children in Research Projects, Challenges and Potentials of Philosophy with Children. What I would like to do is today to present some key points from my upcoming chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Children-Centered Approach and Migrant Children, which is to come out soon, and I will discuss methodological challenges and potentials of including philosophical dialogues from the tradition of philosophy with children in the design of research projects involved with children. And here I will also present very briefly along the way different research projects that I have been engaged in and where we have been using philosophy with children in those research projects. My talk here will center around 4 themes. So to begin with, I will introduce briefly what philosophy with children is, because it's probably not well known to all of us. So I'll introduce to the field. I can say to begin with, philosophy with children, or PWC, has mainly been a school practice. So we are in a way entering rather new land here when we also try to include philosophy with children as a research method. Secondly, I will go more into reasons why to consider PWC as a research method. What are the potentials based on previous research and theoretical considerations in the field. As I said, I will also go into the challenges and discuss some of those, and towards the end, propose a few brief remarks regarding ways forward in order to promote philosophy with children in research. So let's get started with what is philosophy with children. Philosophy with children, or PWC, or sometimes referred to as P4C, it refers generally to different programs and activities where children participate in philosophical dialogue. But it's important to say that it is not pedagogical activities or teaching activities where children are taught philosophy. They are rather doing philosophy. The practice stems from Matthew Lipman's Philosophy for Children program at Montclair State College, and was developed in the 70s. I should say, though, that after the initial development, the practice and the programs has developed in many different directions. To Lipman, originally it was key that children gained skills in terms of argumentation and reasoning, which was something that he wanted students to arrive with when they went to college. But in recent years, there has been a lot of other focuses also within this broad field, and my interests, as I will introduce today, also have other focuses than what was initially in the Lipman tradition. Research has shown a lot of positive effects in relation to language, mathematical skills, and abstract thinking, which is very much in the tradition of Lipman. But likewise, research also suggests that philosophical dialogue can have a positive impact on social dynamics at class and school level, and other positive impacts that are broader than the focus on individual skills suggest. But I will come back to that later. When PWC is taught in or conducted in schools or other institutions, there are some core features despite the differences across different programs. So typically, students sit in a circle on chairs without tables or on the floor, as we see at the picture down to the left. The teacher is not teaching academic content, but guide the students' dialogue and help ensure relevance and quality. The conversation starts from a short story involving props, paper and pencil, or the like. And topics of a dialogue can be anything in relation to complex questions, for example, about justice, nature, life, responsibility, identity, home, belonging, etc. Typically, in training of facilitation, it is said that the topics are of a nature that cannot be Googled. That's a good simple rule of what topics can be of the conversation. So the students talk to each other in pairs and in plenary sessions. And there are also often in these programs ground rules for when to speak and the procedure of the dialogue. It's also important to say that besides these formal ways of organizing the sessions, there are also some knowledge in the field regarding what kinds of questions can be the starter of the dialogue. Worley, for instance, which I refer to here, has this important distinction between grammatically closed questions and conceptually open questions, which has proven to be important in order to formulate questions within this field. So questions that can open up for these conceptual thinking, and they can perfectly well be yes and no questions. As I've indicated in the previous slide, the teacher or educator acts as a facilitator, which is different from a traditional teacher. So to quote Kennedy, the facility is a coast and a catalyst for the inherent autopoiesis of group dialogue. So in philosophy with children or philosophy for children, the power dynamics of students and teachers is changed. So the facilitator is a guide and assistant to the group work. And the group of children or youth are perceived of as a community of inquiry, which can be defined in this way, also drawing on Kennedy and Kennedy. A community of philosophical inquiry is understood here as an intentional speech community in the form of a relatively stable and regularly attending group of people who meet in order to dialogue with each other about philosophical concepts. So in this kind of pedagogical practice, the students or children are understood as a group that inquire topics together, and it is the working together and the collaboration that takes center stage. In my work, I'll just briefly mention 3 projects where I, in one way or the other, have been working with philosophy with children. At our university here, University of Southern Denmark, we have since 2017 had the Philosophy in Schools project, which where we have been exploring PwC practices in schools and other institutions. And here I have had a special interest in the practices when taught in schools and areas marked by marginalization and with students who are minoritized. In the Migrate project, the Horizon project, which was coordinated by Matea and her team, we used philosophy with children in the Danish part of the research. So trying to adapt this kind of practices and using it as a kind of a focus group setup. And also currently I'm part of a project on eco-engagement and eco-literacy, where we also explore these topics through philosophy with children in high school settings. This was just to also give you a context of where I locally is situated. Just a short snapshot from the Migrate project, where we the template for the dialogue which we used in the research project also eventually was adopted in our handbook for teachers, which also shows how in this kind of research the practices can be used both as a pedagogical school practice and as a research practice. So this was just also to show this for inspirational purposes. So this was to say something about what philosophy with children is. Then regarding the potentials of philosophy with children as a research method. In the literature, it's pointed to that philosophy with children can provide a safe space for children navigating intersexual identities, which can be especially interesting in research on migration and belonging, etc., but in practice in all kinds of research involving children. Philosophy with children practices can be used to the acquisition of skills required as citizens in pluralistic society, which is pointed to by Barrow. And that's also why this practice is often introduced in citizen education across the world. Um, Philosophy with children can also help counter the epistemic injustice done to children, and this is a core argument within the literature, and I'll go a bit further into that, drawing on Murray's. So in schools, children traditionally suffer from epistemic injustice. Their credibility is deficit is related to age, as Murray's points to. And the epistemic superiority of children of teachers prevent children from being heard. So teachers' self-identity as epistemic authorities often prevent children from being heard in schools. We have seen that traditionally, but that continues to be the place in many contexts also. Within the Murray also points to that philosophy of children marks a critique of the developmental psychological model of children. In that model, children are treated as becomings and not beings, and in philosophy of children, the reverse perspective is in place. So to Murray's, and this echoes a lot in the field, philosophy for children is an answer. The theory and practice of P4C challenges the hidden discrimination of epistemic injustice by making room for children as thinkers and demands children to be taken seriously as knowers. As a research method, PwC offer a methodology that is highly child-centered, and PwC offers a framework for countering power imbalances. And finally, PwC, I would point to, implies the idea that knowledge is not an essentialized entity to be collected, rather it is generated in communal communicative practice. This has also led people to suggest it as a interview method, as this point of this quote here, which I will not go further into. But based on the suggestions in the field regarding the pedagogical practice, it is reasonable, I think, to consider the practice a research method also. But in doing so, it's important that we take challenges into consideration also, and I will point to some of them. In recent years, there's been criticism leveled against PwC from a decolonial perspective and from a critical race theory perspective. Traditionally, in the field, there's been a tendency to focus on the argumentative features and reasonability in PwC, which can be exclusive to minoritized views and opinions, according to Chetty. And also intersectional issues surrounding identity categories such as children and race has been neglected in the field. And in the field, there's also been, in the research, there's also been pointed to the problem of instrumentalization. So if we just implement this practice, then things will change of itself. I'll point to, together with others, that a lot of reflexivity goes into introducing PwC as a research method. Taking these challenges into consideration, I'll point to a few ways forward before I conclude the talk. I think it's needed that there's a continuous development of new materials, and we need to formulate questions in this field where we take into account the criticism of critical race theory and other critical perspectives. I think it's important that we draw on PwC practices to insist on the benefits of positioning groups of children and youth as a community of inquiry rather than providers of knowledge. I think also it's important to include facilitation training in research, training, and development. And here we can find inspiration from using philosophy for teachers, where it has been suggested to use philosophical dialogues in teacher training in order to create a space for reflexivity in teacher training. I think there's reasons to say that PwC can be inspirational as a practice that can inform methodological meta-reflexivity in research projects, where the same kind of procedures that we see when doing it with children can easily be introduced to adults as well in professional development of group work. Yeah, by this I come to the conclusion. There's a lot more to say about this topic. I hope these few points have been of inspiration, and I'm happy to take questions later on in the discussion section. So thank you all for the attention.
Thank you very much, Zoran. Yes, the discussion we will put at the end, and we'll just continue with the second presentation that will be by Barbara Gornik, a colleague from the Science and Research Center Koper, and the title of her presentation is Children as Agents in the Adult-Centric Political Space. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matea. I assume you can see my screen, yes? My presentation.
Yes, yes.
That's great. Okay, so thank you and welcome also on my behalf. As Matea said, my name is Barbara Gornik and I come from Science and Research Center of Koper, but I'm also affiliated now at the Faculty of Arts at University of Ljubljana. I'm an anthropologist and I usually work with anthropology of human rights, but I use this theoretical framework in different themes, and one of the themes are also migrant children and child migration. But currently I'm also involved in this project, which is called the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Anthropological Perspective. This is Jean Monnet model, which is carried out at University of Ljubljana. And together with Coordinate Project, here we joined forces to organize this webinar together, also with the aim to discuss certain rights that are enshrined in this important legal document. And in this case, in my case of my presentation, this will be the children's right to be heard. So, but my today's presentation is actually based on the chapter that will be published soon in the Oxford Handbook of Child-Centered Approaches to Migrant Children. That will happen in a matter of few months. The chapter title is Migrant Children as Agents in the Adult-Centered Political Space. And as you can see, the title indicates that I'm mostly dealing here with migrant children, but nevertheless, I also deal with a lot of aspects that are relevant for children's political agency in general. So just to mention briefly, this chapter has been an output or result of the project Migrant Children Communities in Transforming Europe, which was implemented at Science and Research Center. Together, we coordinated it with Matea. So this is a brief background of today's presentation. I will be focusing mainly on children's political agency in relation to their rights to be heard. I will also draw a little bit on the normative frameworks that in the political space hinder practicing a political agency. And I will also touch upon two theoretical concepts which can lend us a way forward, or main takeaways how we can, promote children's participation in political context as such. So, okay. What are we talking about when we're talking about children's political agency? Well, at least in my case, in my chapter, I tend to understand children's political agency as their capacity to act politically, but also their capacity to exercise political power and their involvement into definition of common ways of life. So as you can see, basically, I understand children's political agency as their active involvement in the political space. Active involvement means also not only offering them a place where they can express their views, but also to take their views into account, so actively listening to children. So why is it important that we talk about children's political agency? In my view, there is certainly a policy aspect why this topic is important. In the academic scholarly field, scholars who deal with child protection policies, for example, generally agree that these policies have to start from what is known about children. But there is also a quite common agreement that these policy measures, if they are to be effective, they also must be relevant to children and not only to adult policymakers. And recently, there has been also very strong emphasis on the perspective of children. So academics and scholars now tend to agree that policy measures which are included in the policy that affect children also need to be based on the perspective of children in order to increase their impact. So there is also a legal aspect why why political agency of children is important. And I would say there is no surprises in this respect. We all know the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, but also the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union. They actually both very explicitly emphasize that all children have a right to be heard on the one hand, but on the other hand, they also very clearly emphasize that governments have an obligation to take their view into account. So this is especially, I would like to stress this phrase, which is specified here in the right corner, the views of the child being given due weight. I think this gives an interpretation, a possible interpretation that actually children's political agency is not something that is dependent on the goodwill of the governments, but is actually their legal obligation because they have to take children's view into account when they are taking certain decisions. And then we come directly to the political aspect, which I also think it's very important when discussing this, or maybe even the most important, is I would like to mention here this important distinction between individual and collective dimension of the right to be heard. As we all know, each particular child has a right to be heard at the level of legal and administrative procedures, but maybe less known are also the collective dimension of this right. And UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has been very clear in this regard by saying that the governments have a legal obligation to include the views of children as a special social group within our society into account. So they have to accept or take their views into account when they are developing specific laws, policy, programs, and services, all, for example, in the places or in the areas that also concern children. So again, this is being given due weight. It's a very important aspect of this right to be heard. Why? Again, because this grants political legitimacy to children's views. They cannot be just simply disregarded or ignored. But also more importantly, this phrase kind of by granting political legitimacy to children's views also disrupt the adult-centered political space, I would say, and also importantly, it challenges the dominant discourses about whose knowledge is it that it counts, because usually these political spaces are adult dominated. We have seen quite we have seen quite few improvements in regard to the right to be heard in recent decades. Definitely, I would say that right to be heard at individual level has been recognized, and there is increased awareness among the decision makers about this right. And also that several attempts have been made in different countries where right to be heard is supposed to be or expected to be implemented at this collective level. So there were initiatives related to establishing children parliaments, council advisory boards, children's commissioners, and so on. However, many authors highlight and note that even in these initiatives, children rarely have ability or opportunity to actually shape policies, and they do not actually exercise political power. So their political power in this regard is very limited. So what we can say in this respect is that more than 30 years after the adoption of the CRC, children still remain a social group that is excluded from political decision-making. But why is this the case? Of course, on one hand, we do still have a lack of awareness of policymakers about this collective dimension of children's right to be heard, no doubt about that. But also, as I try to point out, there is also a lack of awareness on how this right should be implemented. And this inevitably brings to inadequate implementation of this right at the policy level. There are no systemic solutions that would bring children to the level of policy or the policy-making cycles. And even as we saw these initiatives about Children Parliaments Council, all more often have educational role or some consultative role rather than actually offering children to take active part in politics. So importantly, why this also happens is the normative frameworks that sustain subordinated position of children in the political space are also related to adultism. Adultism is actually ideology that kind of assumes that adults are superior to children. And in relation to this and why children are excluded actually from the political space, I would just like to mention these three that you can see on my slides. And the first one is the incompetent status. Why children are excluded from the political space? It is often because they are seen not fully competent to hold levers of power themselves. So basically, in line with this assumption, children are more or less perceived to be immature or inexperienced, but sometimes also impulsive, irresponsible, and so on. Then and in a way, this kind of incompetence is assumed that children gain competence through aging. So first the transition from child, then to adult, and then finally from to youth and then to adult kind of brings this necessary experience when they can, as adults, exercise political power. And then if we take a look at the caretaker thesis, why are children excluded from the political space? Is it because they are seen as insufficiently knowledgeable about the world and as somebody who needs adults to be protected? So children are seen lacking sufficient experience, while adults are there to protect them from making mistakes or prevent harm in their present and future lives. What is the effect of this normative assumption? However, is that it also maintains or marginalizes knowledge that is possessed by children. And also it excludes knowledge that centers on children because the decisions or the policies may be then designed in line what adults believe it's in the best interest of the child. Again, focusing on the future, on children as future adults, but maybe less on how they feel in the present lives. And finally, there is also the adultism also manifests in relation to the adult forms of agency. So we have to be aware that existing political space is very much adjusted to the competences of the adults, and in this way is not attuned to accommodate children's specific form of communication. And this is why some authors or some critical thinkers believe that involvement of children in the adult-dominated institutions, for example, such as councils, advisory boards, and so on, actually reinforces rather contests the hierarchies between adults and children. because we have to be aware in a way that political space works as a network of very clear hierarchical relationships. And this relationship very much determines the scope, ability, and readiness of children to express views. For example, some children might not even want to participate in such context, while some who are willing to take part in that must follow certain rules. These are contexts or places where certain voices can be expressed, certain opinions can be voiced, but other are better to be silent. So there are about certain rules about proper behavior that additionally limit what children are willing to share with adults in this context. So when we're talking about child-centered approach to political space or seeing a child political agency, children's political agency, for us researchers, it is important to look beyond this adult-centered or the conventional places where politics are practiced. And then we come to two concepts, which I also discuss in my chapter. The first one is childism. Childism offers, I would say, a way beyond, a glimpse beyond this focus on the conventional places, because childism, as you can see, I use it as understood by John Wall. He explains that childism is used in analogy with feminism or race theory and environmentalism. And the basic premise of this perspective is that it is not enough to bring children's voices to the political agenda, but it's also important to transform these structural practices and norms which actually define the political spaces, which are actually excluding towards children and are not very age inclusive. So it is about the transformation of the existing practices, and how this can be also viewed. In my chapter, I use the concept of voiceless politics. I like it very much because it is based on the observation that children seldom express their views within the conventional political space, for example, formal politics, policymaking, or social activism. And authors Kallio and Hackley highlight that in this respect, we have to make a distinction between politics with big P, so macro politics, and politics with a small p, so micro politics, whereas the first focuses on these more conventional places where politics is practiced. The micro politics understand politics also as embedded in everyday life, in everyday practices, everyday behavior. So if we are again looking back at what this means for children's political agency, we can then understand that a voiceless politics gives a framework where children's politics is seen as mobilized in unconventional ways. What this means is that even children's behavior or practices, whatever they do, for example, at home, in relation with their families, their friends, in schools, teachers, can be also understood as political participation and expression of political views, even if this is not perceived as political per se. And I think if we accept this standpoint, or at least this perspective, this enables us to rethink children's participation as embedded in everyday life and interaction. So yes, to maybe use the words of Kallio and Hackley, for them, voiceless politics refers to non-participatory political engagement, which does not include civic involvement and the usual participatory practices, and does not neither involve voiced resistance. So it basically focuses on what is implied in mundane practices of children's everyday life. And this approach evidently recognizes the political messages, tries to interpret messages as political, what is implied in children's struggles, decisions, tactics, and strategies. That's how they live, actually. So just to sum up, so when we're talking about political agency, I just would like to reiterate that it is not simply about bringing their views, children's views to the political agenda. It is also about the transformation of this political space, more or less to make it more age inclusive, because currently the political space is really dominated by adults and adult created norms. But also what is important, it's to look beyond this, as I said, to look beyond this conventional context where politics is practiced. And this actually means that recognizing children's political agency does not necessarily involve their direct political participation in this adult-dominated context, but can be, for example, accomplished through participatory research or concept like voiceless politics. So yes, definitely to conclude, recognizing children's political agency is, in my view, primarily about creating an autonomous space, so where the children can express their views as autonomously and with less constraints as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Barbara, for a very interesting presentation. And now we are at the final presentation. It is prepared by 3 authors. However, it will be presented only by one. So the authors of the last presentations are Bianca Basler, Lisa Rosen, and Fena Tomdek from the University of Kaiserslautern, Landau, from the Institutes for General Educational Science, Department of Intercultural Education. And the title of the presentation is Participatory Approaches in Education Studies, the Way to Child-Centered Approach. And the presentation will be presented by Lisa Rosen. So please, Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mattea, for introducing. And my question is, can you all see my slides now in a correct way? Yeah, okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. And thank you also for inviting us. I will not draw, or we will not draw on forthcoming chapters as the 2 presenters did, but we will draw on an ongoing research project where Zoran, the first speaker, is the general or the principal investigator. It's a Horizon project. And I'm now going to share some considerations and experiences we do when applying a participatory approach. So just check. Sorry, I have to skip with some. So with this first slide, I want to introduce some general considerations. So participatory research encompasses a range of approaches that aim to explore and to actively shape social realities in collaboration with children or those involved. So its primary objective is not only to analyze social structures and practices, but also to bring about meaningful change through cooperative research processes. So at its core, participatory research promotes social participation by directly involving children in the research process, or people or those to be co-researchers, enabling them to contribute their perspectives, their experiences, and their expertise. This makes it a fundamentally value-driven approach and guided by principles such as social justice, environmental justice, human rights, and the promotion of democracy. So to introduce this perspective, we refer to a quotation from Hella von Unger. She's a researcher widely recognized in Germany for her work on participatory research, and her definition shown here on the slide highlights the transformative and justice-oriented nature of this approach, emphasizing its role in fostering democratic participation and societal change. So in the field of education studies, participatory approaches offer a powerful means to critically examine educational processes and amplify marginalized perspectives and develop more equitable, inclusive educational practices. So when engaging in participatory research with children, it is essential to follow guiding principles that ensure ethical, meaningful, and respectful collaboration. So the following key aspects provide a framework and for conducting research with children and acknowledging their perspectives and safeguard their rights and maintains their research integrity. So a central principle of participatory research is to actively perceive and acknowledge children's perspectives. And this involves children as social actors with their own experiences, their own interpretations and knowledge. However, traditional research often marginalizes children's voices, treating them as passive subjects rather than co-creators of knowledge. And a crucial aspect is therefore to relativize those power asymmetries and power relations, at least within the research context. So researchers must critically reflect on their own positionality, on their adultism, their authority, while fostering an environment where children feel empowered to express their views freely. So this means using child-friendly methodologies, ensuring voluntary participation, and valuing their contributions equally. Secondly, in addition to ethical considerations, research with children must adhere to fundamental principles that ensure rigor and accountability. So these include quality criteria, so high methodological standards must adhere, or must produce meaningful insights while adapting to the needs of the children participating. Then financing and expectations of the financer. And right here, I'm speaking from our experiences taking part in an EU Horizon project. So research funding often comes with specific expectations from those financing, the third middle parties. So balancing these expectations with the ethical demands of participatory research requires transparency and negotiation. And secondly, personal targets. So, for example, researchers' own qualifications. Researchers should reflect on their own motivations, their learning objectives, and the impact of their roles in shaping research dynamics. So, thirdly, the practical conditions of the research field play a significant role in shaping participatory research with children. Important factors include time and data security, security of field entries, so gaining access to the research fields such as schools or community organizations requires really a careful negotiation with gatekeepers, and while ensuring that the children's participation remains voluntary. Thirdly, expectations of the field regarding the research process. So researchers, we have to be mindful of the expectations placed on them by institutions, the caregivers, and the children themselves. And so we have to engage in trust building and fostering clear communication. And last but not least, considering children's rights, children's welfare, and child protection above all, participatory research must center on children's well-being. So this includes ensuring informed consent, preventing harm, and adhering to legal and ethical frameworks related to child protection. Yeah, so engaging in participatory research with children requires researchers to adopt specific attitudes, and we draw on two quotes, one that is called Attitude of Methodological Immaturity, and the second one, Attitude of Cultural Humility. So rather than striving for complete control and expertise, methodological immaturity emphasizes the incompleteness, the fallibility, and the evolving nature of research. This perspective challenges the notion of researchers as rational, fully competent and autonomous agents. Instead, with this term methodological immaturity, it is emphasized that research can be messy and it is then framed as an ongoing process of learning and unlearning and reorientation. So from this perspective, if researchers were fully mature, that is, if they already had all the answers, research itself would become unnecessary. Instead, research thrives on uncertainty, questioning, and even making mistakes. True commitment to participatory research with children means accepting, not knowing, and embracing moments of doubt, correction, and transformation. So it requires researchers to acknowledge their own vulnerabilities and limitations rather than pretending to be so-called neutral experts. So in practice, it means approaching research with a willingness to learn from children, to accept that one's assumptions will be challenged, and to be open to unexpected insights. So this attitude fosters a more authentic and reciprocal research relationship, particularly in participatory contexts where collaboration and shared meaning making are key. So closely related to the methodological immaturity is the concept of cultural humility, which embraces an attitude of openness and continuous learning too. Rather than assuming that researchers can achieve complete competence about children's cultures and perspectives, cultural humility encourages an ongoing process of self-reflection and inquiry. So this stance is based on 3 key principles. First, a commitment to ongoing self-awareness, supported by diverse and trusted colleagues who can offer different perspectives. A willingness to learn and to be taught, allowing researchers to engage with cultural experiences from the perspective of children or others, rather than imposing their own interpretations. And second, a critical awareness of power structures, recognizing how social inequalities, privilege, and systemic dynamics shape both research encounters and broader social realities. And thirdly, cultural humility recognizes that cultures are fluid rather than fixed, and calls on both individual researchers and institutions to take responsibility for addressing social inequalities and power imbalances. So in participatory research, this means actively working against hierarchical relationships between researchers and children and promoting more equitable knowledge production. Wait. Okay, so by embracing methodological immaturity and cultural humility, researchers position themselves as co-learners rather than authoritative experts. So these attitudes enable participatory research to be a space for exchange, reflexivity, and transformation, where knowledge is co-created rather than imposed. And recognizing one's own limitations and biases is not a weakness, but a strength that enhances the ethical and relational dimensions of research. And with the 4 next slides, I want to show you some examples how such reflexivity can be put into practice. And here you can see researchers and art practitioners in the Horizon project exploring and educating cultural literacy through art, discovering arts-based methods in which the children of the collaborating schools and communities will participate. So they're exploring those methods by themselves before practicing them with the children involved in the project. And on this slide, you see pictures taken by the Chaos Comic Club in Germany, and their graphic recordings serve as more than just illustrations. They act as powerful tools for critical reflections. So by visually documenting moments of uncertainty and power negotiation in learning, they encourage researchers to engage with their own positionality in a deeper and in a more interactive way. So this makes those graphic recordings a very valuable resource for participatory research and helping to create a more reflexive and self-aware research practice. So this were taken last year, 2024, and the slide before that was last week. I go back. here you can see us last week, and within this project we meet regularly just to have this kind of space for reflexivity on positionality and biases. Okay, so this one you have already seen. Okay. I think I have to hurry up, or what is it saying in the chat? So another way to engage with reflexivity is to prepare, or is to create situational maps according to Adele Clark. And this is one of the first. So these are situational maps, and these are followed by other maps called social word and arena maps and positional maps. And right now in the project, we are comparing the first and second mapping. And this is also recorded, graphically captured by the Chaos Comic Club. So you can see how we jointly discuss our mapping. So this visual insights lead me to the next point, that participatory research with children also means to take into account the children's multiliteracies. And multiliteracy is also a key concept within the research project I'm referring to. So in participatory research with children, it is crucial to recognize and integrate their diverse multiliteracies, and the concept of multiliteracies, introduced by the New London Group in 1996, emphasizes that meaning making takes place through multiple modes, not only linguistic, but also visual, auditory, gestural, and spatial. So these literacies shape how children understand, express, and communicate knowledge, their experiences and their emotions. So first of all, it's about bridging the gap between schools and everyday literacies. Traditional models of education and also research often privilege school-based literacies. So that means structured, written, and formal. However, children's literacy practices extend far beyond the classroom. So they engage in home and local literacies and are influenced by their backgrounds, digital environments, social interactions. So recognizing this diverse literacy practices in research ensures that children's voices are fully understood and represented, or maybe more understood and represented than drawing on school-based literacies. Secondly, recognizing linguistic diversity and communication practices. Children navigate between formal and informal language, moving between academic writing, speech, and vernacular expressions. And in research settings, expecting children to conform with rigid linguistic structures can silence them or misrepresent their perspectives. So instead, an inclusive approach values how they communicate in everyday life, whether through storytelling, dialectic, or visual expression. Thirdly, while research often prioritizes written communication, children often engage in graphic, spoken, projected, or enacted forms of expression. So drawings, digital media, performances, and role plays can provide richer insights into their experiences than written surveys or interviews alone. So the use of multimodal research tools is consistent with participatory principles, allowing children to share their experiences in ways that are the most comfortable for them. So fourthly, the literacy is often limited to language-based learning, but children make meaning through mathematics, science, history, geography, and artistic expression, and recognizing this diversity prevents a narrow one-size-fits-all approach and instead encourages interdisciplinary holistic research and engagement with children. So last but not least, valuing multilingualism. In migration societies, many children grow up with regional, Aboriginal, immigrant, and foreign or home languages in addition to national languages, and their literacy practices are characterized by code mixing and code switching, multilingual storytelling, and also translanguaging. So a participatory research approach that recognizes and encourages these linguistic resources promotes a more equitable and inclusive knowledge production. So in conclusion, Multiliteracies, also attention to multiliteracies is not just a methodological choice. It is an ethical imperative. It ensures that research does not impose dominant literacy forms, adult literacy forms and norms, but instead values children's diverse ways of knowing, communicating, and meaning making. So by integrating multiliteracies into participatory research, we create more authentic and inclusive, empowering spaces for children to express their perspectives. So participatory research is often framed as a way of empowering children and recognizing their agency. However, it is important to think critically about whether these efforts really give children a voice, or whether they impose adult-driven structures of participation, or if they are simply, and now I'm referring to Barbara's chapter, if they are just included in an adult world without transforming the world. So first of all, a key critique is that the expectation of participation risks setting rigid norms for how children should engage. So researchers warn that this can devalue alternative ways in which children express themselves, including forms of non-participation. So children are constantly shaping their own social realities, sometimes outside or even in resistance to the frameworks imposed by adults. So when participation is structured by adults, does it really recognize children as active agents? The concept of empowerment is central to participatory research, yet it assumes that children need adult-designed tools to exercise their agency. So we could argue this risks reinforcing the very power dynamics that participatory approaches seek to dismantle. So if empowerment is something that adults give to children, who actually holds the power? Another key issue is that the assumption that participatory methods naturally enable agency. However, knowledge is never neutral. It is shaped by power. By equating agency with participation in research, we risk overlooking that the many ways in which children exercise agency outside of these formal structures. Agency can also include resistance, subversion, or choosing not to participate at all. So looking at the broader agenda, what is research really for? Finally, we need to recognize that participatory research is not just about listening to children. It is embedded in broader political and social agendas. Research with children is often linked to policy and concerns about shaping ideal future citizens, making them more employable, productive, and engaged in society. This raises an uncomfortable question. Are we doing participatory research for the sake of children? Or are we influenced by adults' anxieties about their future roles in society? So in conclusion, participatory research has a great potential, but we need to remain reflexive. Are we reinforcing hierarchies? Are we leaving room for non-participation? And how do broader societal goals shape our research? By continually asking these questions, we can move beyond a simple rhetoric of participation and truly value children's perspectives on their terms, not on adult terms. So as you can see, Bianca, Fenna, and I, we like to draw on questions to remain reflexive, and this is something we do in Expect Art. But now we want to refer to a colleague from Germany, Nedvig Gesemann, who has prepared a set of questions which can be used which can be used to remain reflexive and applied throughout the whole research process. And this last slide is just a simple takeaway. I'm not going to read out all these questions. Some of them were already mentioned before. And so I turn to my last. So thank you for your attention. And on the right side, you see a picture on what will be handed out by Bianca and Fenna right now. This is the reason why they can't be here. They're attending, they're doing field research right now, and they are giving handbooks and pens to children to make them feel as researchers, because Fenna and Bianca are equipped with that. And so they hand out this to the kids to be researchers, co-research too. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for a very interesting presentation. So we are at the end of this first part. We heard 3 interesting presentations, and now is the time for possible questions or comments. If you would like raise a question to our presenters, please raise a hand, or you can also write us the question in the chat. We will consider both of them, both options. Meanwhile, when I will give you time, to formulate the questions, I will raise the first question to Zoran. So, Zoran, listening to your presentation, I will ask you how to avoid very practical constraint, and this is how to include in the discussions, under this philosophy with children, how to include the children that are, more silent, more introvert, they are maybe not so fluent in the host language if we are talking about the migrant children and so on. How we avoid, or how we go beyond, these problems, this constraint.
Thank you so much, Matea, for raising this question. This is a question often raised in the field, and actually also raised by teachers, for instance, who are in facilitation training, and by others. There are different ways of trying to accommodate. As you say, children who might be more silent or avoid speaking up. First of all, it's very important in these philosophical dialogues to be able to set up the safe space in a way where there is room for articulating ideas. Also, if more space is needed. One of the things that is widely used in the field is, for instance, if there is a question posed in the dialogue, then offer time for peer discussion of the question, so that not everything is on the children to be said in the large group. This is one thing, but what we also see with groups of children who engage with these kind of practices over time is that as a group, they, through the facilitation, etc., also be acquainted to a more slow way of being together, in a way, if I can describe in that way. So over time, we see that children who normally not engaged in large group discussions become more confident because of the focus of the discussions. Well, the focus is on the collaboration on tackling the questions rather than what the individual performs. But it comes with this practice. A lot of reflexivity is needed upon the facilitator, and a lot of adaptations and negotiations with the groups. But there are certain very specific things facilitators can do. For instance, this peer group discussion and ways of asking that is invitive to these groups of children also.
Thank you, Zoran.
Can I
Uh,
add?
Yes, please, Barbara, you're welcome.
I think I will say the same thing as Zoran did, but with different words.
Yeah.
Because of course I was not involved with the philosophy with children, but when we did the participatory research in the My Create project, for me it was important that we devoted sufficient time before starting the actual research, like to spend time with children. We did research in schools. So I went there, spent time in the classroom. I wanted to stay away from the teachers on one hand, even during the breaks, not talk to teachers so much, in a way to kind of highlight that I am not a part of the teacher, that I'm a researcher. I want to hang out with the school, with the students and so on. And once as a researcher you feel that this relationship is growing, this also, I think, it contributes to this other aspect, which is also crucial, to involve children that are not maybe so keen on participating, is you build trust. So you build trust. This then can lead to some relationship that even those shy and more silent students eventually open up, as Zoran said. So, and these two comes together. Another thing that came to my mind is the need for flexibility. For example, not all children are willing to, or are feeling the best in the same environment. So as it is recommended in much of the literature discussing participatory research with children, there is a certain need for multi-method approach. For example, if some students feel more comfortable talking with you alone, then I think this can be, we can adjust the methods, to also include their voices. And we have to be attentive, as Zoran said. We have to be constantly reflexive about who has been already included, let's say, during our field work, and who has been left out. And when we spot that maybe some students were left out, then we have to actively approach them. We might invite them if they want to share something with us, maybe to share it in a different setting and so on. So that would be my additional thought to your question.
Thank you, Barbara. I will just continue where you finished your reflection, because the next question was actually for you, and I was wondering maybe to reflect a little bit on the following thing: how to guarantee the diversification of children voices in the political space, because usually, when we are talking about the inclusion of the children voices, we are talking about one so-called average child, average children. But, we have also children with special needs. We have children on the margin, because they are, migrants or whatsoever. So, in your opinion, this is a very practical aspect, again, how we can increase the possibility to include all this diversity of voices in the so-called political space, which is even more, far away from the adult world.
So yes, definitely the first obstacle is, I would say, an ontological one, because there is lack of awareness on the part of the policymakers that they even have to include voices of children into policy development. Well, obviously the first step in this respect would be to informing the policymakers about how to include in the right way, or a good way, children in this policymaking cycle, at the same time achieving certain diversity. It is very difficult to achieve, let's say, different diversity of voices, because children are a heterogeneous group. as you said. Perhaps this could be done in the aspects that some policies that are applied or they address specific groups of children. For example, asylum policy, for example, deals with very specific group of children that had special needs. And if they are included in this process of policy development, then their voices can be included by focusing on them. But of course, you have then other policies that address different groups of children. And then by referring to these specific policies, to these specific programs that aim to address their needs, and if children are included in the policymaking cycle, then of course their voices can be included. This is not the case for the policies that tend to address children as a general social group. Yes, another thing I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind.
Okay, you can maybe.
Yes,
Do you need some time, more time to reflect it, or you can just, jump in later on when you will remember?
Yes, but well, maybe just to reflect a little bit back on my presentation, it is a lot about listening to children beyond the policymaking, outside of this adult-centered world. But then the question is, how are we as adults willing to listen to what they are saying? Because as Lisa said, for example, they might be subversive, resistant very much to what we as adults are aiming at. So is this because of this clash of interest or different views between adults and children? Are we, for these reasons, are we overriding, their views, their interests, their voices, actually, their opinions and so on? So I think it's important for us, as a researchers, it's easier because we can take a distant look. We are not involved in the policymaking cycle, and then we can see this more like from a distance and reflect on what adults are aiming at and what the children are aiming at. And we can say, okay, perhaps adults are more into the norms related to neoliberalism, capitalism, and constant development, and and so on, while the children are more into, I don't know, current well-being, having fun, I don't know, being popular, and so on. So, but when you are involved in the policymaking cycle as a policymaker, I don't think you are willing to, step down from your position and be open to these kind of values, which obviously are not aligned with the framework of the state and how states should operate. For example, schools, how the curriculum is developed, it always, tends to put more pressure on children. The contents are getting more challenging, more, how do you say, more difficult for children, while the children, it's not that they would like to have more difficult subject in schools, but then the policymakers, despite the children's wishes, impose these new guidelines or new tasks, new programs in school. So they put even more pressure. So yeah, it's I know I went away from the original question. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to include the diversity of voices, especially if we're only looking at this narrow policy space. So.
Thank you, Barbara. Lisa or Zoran, do you want to add maybe something to this Barbara reflection?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Barbara. It's more or less an echo when I'm saying that the critique of participatory research also takes into account that if we think we ask one child is participating in our research, that this child may speak for all. And so it's again taking the diversity into account, not the individual diversity, but the diversity of children at all. It's so this kind of research needs needs time and well, and there are some restrictions given by third-party funded research projects, because when you really want to do participatory research, that means that you develop the research question with the community, with the kids. But you will never ever get a research project funded if you don't have a clear research question and work packages and person months. And so first of all, a real, so-called real participatory research project should start with engaging with children and ask for their questions. But not, I don't want to, with this, I don't want anybody to hesitate from applying a participatory research approach, but if we take this really for granted, that would mean that we should need to also encourage policymakers or those who are funding research to take this into account. And this again, so it's research as can be messy, and I don't know any project which was third-party funded when applying or having 1 year just to discover and co-create a research question with children. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa, for your discussion on this, because I was thinking about to ask you how to avoid this tokenism, because you are so right. Everybody are talking about the participation in researching, participatory research at the EU level. When we are preparing the project proposals, this must be, you really must write down that this will be a participatory research. But then all of us, we are just trapped in this just tokenism, and it's really, really hard to go beyond this and avoid this trap. I will just give the word to Maya, who raised the hand. Maya, please, can you
Yes.
ask the question? Yeah.
Actually, I raised the hand before Lisa started talking, but actually this was exactly as you, Matea, also said. Wanted to ask, although we, I think we were all already talking about this. To me, is there, as Barbara mentions, like the policymakers should incorporate this. Also in the calls, European project calls, we have participatory as a buzzword, but it's very difficult to incorporate it in a 2 or 3 year project, and if they are talking about it and we try to implement it, we will not be able to fully implement it. And then how to implement it also, as you said, with students, with people who don't want to participate, because it's their right to not be part of the project, to maybe withdraw and so on. But then we don't catch this. Is the I know that we are all developing some kind of methods to try to overcome this, but is there been something done like more widely, do you think? Maybe.
Maya, was it a question addressing me? And sorry for
Yeah, maybe Lisa, Barbara, also Zoran, because I know that I've been talking to all 3 of you already, and it seems that we are always trying to find a solution, which is not a perfect one, but is there maybe something that maybe crossed your mind, how to overcome this?
Well, just a very short answer. I decided for myself that, of course, they're the documents we have to deliver to the third-party funded institution. And there are those independent papers. And within those papers, I would like to talk about mistakes.
For more information, visit www.coordinate-network.eu.